Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to the Call of Karen, lessons from letting the octopus into your home. I'm going to be doing a postmortem on this weird and wild project that took over about a year and a half of my life, taking you through the life and times of this beast of a game about, incidentally, an eldritch beast. I know that we attract a lot of different folks of different backgrounds and experience levels at Boston Post Mortem, so in lieu of laying out too many explicit lessons, I'm going to lay out the facts, what worked for us and what didn't, and you can take what you want from it. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. So, very brief preface so you know what my deal is before we dive into the project, although Alyssa gave me an absolutely lovely introduction. Hi, my name's Kate Olguin, organizer for Boston Post Mortem, so if you've been to one of our recent meetings, you've probably seen me around, game designer at Other Ocean Interactive, and also, I've worked in a lot of other disciplines too. So I've done some art for Mass Digi and Total Respawn AR here, some sound stuff for Firehose Games there, and some QA for Deja Bond too. And, of course, a ton of miscellaneous other personal games of varying quality and success, though none quite as big or with such wild results as the Call of Karen. So, yeah, all these things I did. So, what is the Call of Karen? The Call of Karen is a PC simulation comedy game about a 1950s suburban housewife whose home is invaded by Cthulhu. You play as Karen, trapped in an unhappy marriage, taking care of an ungrateful child. And if that wasn't bad enough, the stars are right and Cthulhu is descending upon the world, starting with your home. You play through mini-games of what a suburban mom would do as her house slowly descends into chaos. It's like Cooking Simulator, but with more eldritch horror. Another important question is, what happened to the Call of Karen? Why am I saying these things to you? Well, we got over 100,000 downloads on Steam, which was very exciting. We also got a lot of exposure on YouTube, over 3.7 million views across different Let's Players. We got a couple of articles on some gaming sites, and a whopping $0 of revenue. Yeah, this game is free, and we don't have any microtransactions or anything. It was truly a labor of love. I will talk about that decision and all of those downloads and views and stuff in more detail later. I've just told you what the Call of Karen is, but of course a picture's worth 1,000 words, and a moving picture's worth even more. So before we continue, I'm going to show you the trailer so you have a better feeling of what I'm talking about here.
Yes, this truly is the American dream. Happy home, happy life, and happy wife. Are you unsatisfied with your lot in life?
Honey, I'll be out late again. Have dinner ready when I get back.
Are you ready to fight back against the insurmountable forces of darkness that hinder your everyday existence?
Honey, have you noticed anything odd lately?
I don't blame you. I'd be pretty upset too if my wife was complaining that much. The Call of Karen. When horrors come to town, your property value will not go down.
Alright, off to the races. Let's start with part 1, Something Stirs in the Abyss. How did this actually all come together? Let me start by introducing our stellar team, our all-star quartet. First of all, we had Tom Tawadros, 3D artist and tech artist, and an absolute whiz with Unreal's lighting and particle system. Next, we had Michael Maticoli, one of our 2 programmers and our main man for UI systems and localization. He also has the patience of an absolute saint and dealt with most of our tech support tickets. We also had Diana Kumikova, another programmer and the one who put the gameplay, audio, and Cthulhu-related happenings together, which is fitting since she's the genius who came up with the name The Call of Karen. And finally, there was me. I was the producer and several other things. I made a blueprint for the game at one point, I made shaders, I modeled a lot of the furniture, I spearheaded the story and overall gameplay design, though of course that was definitely a team effort. And also I voiced one of the main characters, one of the ones you just heard in the trailer, a 1950s radio host with a transatlantic accent named Charles. All of our team members were really eager to learn and really dedicated to the project, which I am forever grateful for. It took a lot to get this project off of the ground, and every team member was absolutely critical to its success. Oh, I'm getting something on the horn here. Sounds like we've got a special word from our sponsors coming in. Ha 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 ha! I fooled you! So for those of you that did not know already, The Call of Karen was, in fact, a student game. This game was made for my senior capstone project. In the past and now, I've kind of buried the lead when talking about it. Students in student games sometimes get a bad rap, and some of that is deserved, and some of it isn't. There are plenty of students that are really annoying, and there are plenty of student games that are pretty terrible. I have made several of those games myself and been plenty annoying myself. But also, can I just say, regardless of your opinion on whether going to school for game development is useful, being a student and trying to get into the games industry is spectacularly stressful. The specter of trying to get a job is looming over you at all times. You're working absolutely crazy hours to finish both your games and your schoolwork, and instead of getting paid, you're the one shelling out to an institution. And also you have to deal with the fact that, hey, there are a lot of people in the industry who really don't like you. And not to say that that's everyone. There are tons of developers who I've talked to that are super sweet to students, and I have the utmost gratitude towards them. But also, the first time I went to GDC, which was as a student, though I was introducing myself as an indie game dev, I chatted with developers who were talking pretty openly about their distaste for game students as a whole. Like, don't get me wrong, some game students are real assholes, but a lot of them are just trying their best. Anyways, that's my tangent over. Basically, here's the deal. This was a student game. We had some stellar guidance from the lovely Dr. Jillian Smith and the incomparable Professor Farley Sherry, our advisors. And the fact that it was a student game really changed the way we went about developing it, because it meant that our schedules and time commitments were weird and wacky, which was something we really had to deal with. Cool? Cool. And now back to our feature presentation. Another thing I really want to point out, though, about the Call of Karen's development is that we are making it as a game first and for a grade second. As in, we actually started planning out the game and meeting up to talk about it and design it a full 6 months before we were doing anything for a grade. And we've been working on it well after we've all left school. When I first got the team together, we established pretty much immediately that we wanted to release this game and that we were going to do it hell or high water, regardless of grades. So, while we were making the game for a grade, we didn't really have any criteria or guidelines that we were following, and our advisors, Jillian and Farley, thankfully trusted us enough to be pretty hands-off. So if you were wondering how this was shaped by being a student game, like I mentioned, it was less about the guidelines and grades, and more about the damn crazy schedules and burnout that we were all constantly facing. So, let's talk about team composition. We had 2 artists and 2 programmers, which, looking back on it, I think we could have used 1 or 2 more of the latter. Not that Michael and Deanna didn't do an incredible job, but they were pretty overworked. All of us at least had some knowledge of each other's disciplines, which really helped us communicate effectively in such a small team. Game making experience, though, that we were pretty light on. I had made a lot of games and done 2 game development internships at that point, but for every other team member, The Call of Karen was the first game that they had brought from start to finish. Now, something about me. Like I said, when we started the Call of Karen, I'd done 2 internships, but I'd also been the president of the game development club at WPI, and I'd been a student assistant, which is basically an undergraduate teaching assistant, for about 10 classes at that point. And most of those classes were intro classes, ones usually populated by students just getting started making games. So, I had some knowledge about game development in the field, but I had a lot of knowledge about fledgling game developers. And what I had determined from that time is that really, when you get down to it, new game developers can make great things. But they really need at least one bastard. In this case, I am defining a bastard as someone who tells the team no when they are getting out of the realm of stuff they can feasibly do in the time that they have. You may think, well, that's a producer, and you're kind of right, but a bastard doesn't necessarily have to do all the other things that a producer does, like organizing and managing the team. And also, of course, I am not calling producers as a whole bastards. They get enough of a bad rap as it is. A bastard just has to remind the team that, no, you don't have as much time to do that thing as you think you do, and we simply cannot do it. I don't know how many of you are or remember being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, making your first video game and thinking, I'm gonna make a turn-based RPG with 12 different classes and 20 different endings. No. No, you're not. And that's totally okay. Until you've really made a game, it's really hard to know what's hard to do. Which is why you need a bastard to tell you. I don't think that the bastard needs to be mean about it. In fact, I think that's quite counterproductive. But they have to be firm, and they have to be able to explain why this sort of thing can't be done in the time allotted, so you're not just that jackass who's saying no for no damn reason. So yeah, I think any game development team with new people on it needs a bastard. I also think that when it comes to students, a lot of people expect professors to be the bastards. And in my experience, Professors are just too ding-dang nice for that. So you gotta find someone homegrown on the team to do it. And that was me. I don't like conflict very much, but my anxiety over the idea that we would have a half-baked game really propelled me forward, and thankfully, my teammates were willing to listen. A lot of people have asked me where the idea for the Call of Karen came from. We were in an interesting situation where we had the team assembled before we had a game decided, so we were really struggling to come up with a game concept. After a few meetings of trying and failing to come up with something that stuck, I asked everyone to come up with some rough ideas after the meeting ended, and then we would all present them to each other at the next one. The one that I came up with and that we all jumped on pretty quickly was as follows. You're a suburban mom who is trying to manage her life as her town/house descends into eldritch insanity. Initially, actually, it wasn't the 1950s. It was closer to modern day. But we decided to go with the 1950s at about the same time that we decided on Cthulhu. See, the majority of Lovecraft's horror is rooted in discriminatory cultural anxieties, specifically racism and xenophobia. We found a lot of these anxieties were mirrored in the 1950s. Considering that we were focusing on the suburban housewife as a character, we specifically decided to play off of the misogyny that a lot of 1950s women experienced. A lot of 1950s women had to maintain perfect lives in the face of shitty stuff constantly happening to them. So, why not add Cthulhu to that list? We thought it was a good setup for comedic purposes, and worked thematically. Win-win. We were also definitely interested in deconstructing the sort of nostalgia that a lot of media has for the 1950s by really showing just how much it sucked. On to part 2, Enter the Karen, where we actually get started working on the game. One of our first big debates in our development was a pretty important one. What platform, VR or PC? We were split pretty evenly on the issue. There were valid arguments on either side. Initially, when we had come up with the idea, we had intended for it to be in VR. Plus, we had access to a lot of neat equipment, and our programmers were interested in trying out the technology. And, as we were trying to be business-minded about the game, VR had a smaller market, which meant that it would be easier for us to stand out. On the other side, there were issues with VR that would be tough to tackle. A big one was that we wanted to playtest early and often to get an outside perspective on the game, and that was going to be a lot harder with VR, given motion sickness and setting up and lugging around equipment. Plus, the smaller market was a problem in that part of the reason the VR market was smaller is because not as many people have VR headsets, so not as many developers have been making stuff because, there isn't as much demand. So it would be harder for us to get widespread appeal than on something like PC. Plus, it was pretty important for us to be able to rapidly prototype and try out things in engine, and needing to use a VR headset for even the smallest of gameplay tweaks was a big concern. After debating back and forth for a while, we ended up setting a firm deadline to hash out the problem by. On that day, both sides presented their final arguments, and then we'd go with whatever the team decided. We ended up going with PC, though we never quite shook our VR inspirations. We still get some people asking if it's a VR game based on the gameplay, which is pretty funny. Even though we never shook off those inspirations, though, it's my opinion that in the end, developing on PC was a good choice. And I'm very grateful that as a team, we were able to deal with this first major crossroads civilly and by examining all sides of the issue. So, once we had an idea hammered out, it was time for meetings. We met almost every weekday. See, like I said, we were students, which meant that we had a limited time outside of classes, classwork, and extracurriculars to do project work. And it was a lot easier to set up time for work when we had a clear, regimented schedule for it. We ended up meeting 4 out of 5 weekdays for most of development for at least an hour. It felt like kind of a lot at first, but it was especially helpful early on. As you might have noticed in our team composition slide, we didn't have a dedicated designer. With a team that small, we decided that it was best if we designed the game together. And with limited time and a small team, it meant that it was in our best interest to make sure that we were all on the same page and fully on board with the overall shape of the game. So having that dedicated time to hash everything out and speak to each other was really useful. So we spent a lot of time discussing the details early on and drafting up documents detailing the vision, pacing, systems, and mechanics of the game, which were invaluable to us as we continued implementation and decided what features to change or cull. As we progressed in development, our meetings changed from design discussions to what we called lab time. At the beginning of lab time, we would do a stand-up, basically, which each team member shared what they worked on since the last meeting and what they were going to work on until the next one. Since we didn't have all that much free time, usually progress between these updates was on the smaller side, but I believe they were very valuable for making sure that everyone was on the same page, which is probably not new to any producers in the audience. After stand-ups, we moved into the meat and potatoes of lab time, which was basically just sitting and working in the same room together. It was really helpful to have a clear, regimented time to do work together, and it was also nice because if you had something on your list that required input from other folks, you could do it during lab time and invite everyone to crowd around your computer to problem solve. When it came to game design, and essentially any of our decisions, listening was absolutely imperative. Like I said, it was really critical to the success of the project that everyone collaborate and have input. And something that I've noticed in most game developer groups, which are usually composed of mainly cis men, is that, well, guys kind of talk a lot. And sometimes they have really useful things to say. And the guys on the Call of Karen team certainly did. They were super insightful. That being said, though, it can quickly turn a conversation into a rapid-fire ping-pong match, jumping from one point to another. And if you're someone who thinks a lot before they say anything, or even if you're just not at all that confident, it can really be difficult to get a word in edgewise. From my observations, usually the opinions of women, non-binary folks, and people of color are casualties of this speedy conversation. When you're trying to make it into an industry that isn't always the most friendly to you, you tend to think really carefully about what you say so that you can come across as smart and competent. But unfortunately, since these other folks don't really have those reservations and are just going back and forth, this can often lead to you just not saying anything at all. You've probably noticed by now that I love to talk, but even so, this is something that I've struggled with in all stages of my career. So, as such, it was really important to me in the Call of Karen to make sure that everyone felt heard. We did devolve into rapid-fire conversation frequently, but before we shelved a topic and moved on to the next one, I specifically asked teammates who weren't talking as much or hadn't talked at all what their opinions were, or if they had anything to add before we moved on. A lot of times, the teammates I asked brought up something really important that we hadn't even considered. So even though it did sometimes extend our meetings a bit, it was always worth it in my opinion. I understand that if you've got a big team, this sort of make sure every individual team member has had a chance to speak before moving on thing is sometimes not very viable. But I really did want to bring this up because it's a topic that's really important to me, and I think that the contributions of each and every team member during meetings like this were absolutely critical to the game's success. We hear a lot in games about encouraging diversity and new voices in the industry, and of course part of that is getting more diverse people in the field. But, of course, you've got to support the people who are already there first, and I really think that this sort of thing is an understated component of that. So, keep that in mind. As we were a team of 4 with a tight schedule, scope was constantly one of our biggest concerns. When possible, we tried to spin scope issues into ways that worked for us. We decided pretty early on that we weren't going to have any resources to model Karen's neighborhood, and we weren't going to have any other characters visible at all. We determined that the amount of time that it would take to model, texture, and in the character's cases animate all of the assets was better spent in other areas. Of course, this gave us a couple of issues. Part of the message that we were trying to convey with the story was that, that Karen, like so many other women in the 1950s, was seen as having no value outside of being a perfect wife and mother. And from day one, we had also wanted a sort of passive-aggressive rivalry with Karen's neighbors. How are we supposed to show all of that if she didn't ever see her family, the neighbors, or the neighborhood? After puzzling it over, we figured out some solutions. First of all, the fact that Karen couldn't really ever go outside actually kind of ended up elevating the message we were trying to convey. It made her life feel a lot more repetitive and isolating, which is something we were really going for. To deal with the physical absence of the husband and kid, we decided on using some spatial audio to make it sound like they were shouting at you from across the house, but you never actually saw them. It was a stylistic choice that we were able to pull off since we were primarily a comedy game, and we thought that the fact that you managed to miss your husband and kid all the time and that they were always rushing from place to place was pretty funny. And once again, it contributed to that feeling of isolation. One of our other scope challenges was how to incorporate the overall story into the gameplay. Karen didn't talk much to her husband and kids since they were always brushing her off, and any new gameplay elements or cutscenes would be a huge resource sink. What we ended up with was a primarily audio-based story featuring the transatlantic radio announcer uncannily commenting on the things that happened in the house as he himself descends into madness. This worked really well for us. It meant that we could keep the mood lighthearted. Karen's dialogue with her family without the radio announcer to bring the room back up was pretty depressing, and it was an easy way to incorporate more Cthulhu and 1950s flavor and make sure that the world outside felt like it was still moving. And still existed. We listened to a lot of 1950s radio to capture the right vibe and used several fun and funky audio effects to really sell the idea of the radio announcer losing his mind. Playtesting. I cannot overstate the value of playtesting early and often. Playtesting really helped shape the pacing and overall flow of the Call of Karen, and the game would have been drastically different and probably worse had we not done it. We initially had this idea of a real slow and subtle descent into madness, where you were doing your housewife tasks and kind of questioning whether or not anything was going wrong. In theory, great, right? In practice, it was terrible. Tasks were intentionally kind of tedious and repetitive to put you in the mindset of a suburban housewife, and the intrigue and challenge and incentive for doing those tasks came from the weird stuff happening. So, without that weird stuff obviously happening, you're basically just doing chores, which sucks. We realized that we had to give people an obvious hint that something strange was happening pretty early on, and that we needed to keep people consistently engaged with new content. So we had shuffled around our progression map and had to make a pretty tough decision. The way that the game is structured is that Karen does a certain number of tasks in a day, and initially we had planned that the game would be 2 in-game weeks of content. A lot of these 2 in-game weeks relied on that slow ramp-up, so there was a lot of reused content. But after reviewing our playtesting feedback, we decided to slash it to 1 in-game week of content. We decided that we preferred a short and consistently engaging experience than something longer that wouldn't necessarily be as interesting to play. It was a tough decision, but a necessary one. And one that we would never have had the information to make or even consider without playtesting. So, that turned out to be really important. I would be remiss to talk about the development of the Call of Karen without talking about the Mastigi Game Challenge. For those of you that don't know, the Mastigi Game Challenge is a pitching competition hosted by, Mastigi. I had gone twice before. The first time I didn't qualify for finals, and the second time my team was a finalist but got no further. This time I was determined to bring the Call of Karen, not just to try and win, of course, but also because the judges for the competition were industry professionals who gave very specific and very insightful feedback, and I felt like it was important to get that sort of outsider industry perspective on our project. The game challenge was meant to be a good milestone for our project, and in some ways it was, but unfortunately it coincided with a lot of other chaotic milestones. While we were preparing for the game challenge, we were also preparing for class final exams, and preparing to showcase the Call of Karen at WPI's PAX East booth, both looming commitments that really ate into our prep time. In hindsight, I wish I had begun prepping earlier so we didn't feel so crunched in the lead-up. I felt bad drilling the team on getting our presentation down when they were all working so hard on everything else. Team morale has always been really important to me, but that definitely started to slip a little bit during that week. While if I had the chance I would do that part over, I am happy to say that our hard work paid off. We were finalists in the game challenge and runners-up in our category, so we got a nice little trophy, and more importantly, the team absolutely killed it with both presenting and getting all the builds ready. And we got that sweet industry feedback. Our professors, of course, had been giving us valuable advice during all of development, but it was incredibly helpful to hear outsider professionals' perspective on our work and trajectory. And the good news was that the aftermath really boosted team morale. Our game was received well at both the Game Challenge and PAX, so even though we were bone tired, we were really buzzing with enthusiasm at the idea that we had something really cool in our hands. Things were really starting to go our way. Hey, I think I hear a rapping on the window. What could that be? Oh wow, it's the spring of 2020, and we all know what happened in the spring of 2020. A fun fact also, this magazine, Going Outside Without Being Haunted by the Specter of Death, this is in the game, and it was made well before the pandemic really kicked off. So I guess I'm just a prophet? Really cool. Part 3, Chaos City Central. It all kicks off from here, which is funny because we went from 100 to 0. We went from meeting constantly in person and really chugging along to, not that. And who could really blame us? We were 4 students left scrambling with the same sort of questions the studios were trying to answer, like, how do we transition from in-person to remote work so suddenly? How do we playtest remotely? How do we find the motivation to proceed in this goddamn train wreck of a timeline that we're in? It wasn't easy. Some things we did have a bit of an advantage on. While the remote transition was difficult, we did have the benefit that since we did plenty of work outside of our dedicated lab time, we were already used to working on our own to some degree. Meetings were a bit more difficult, though. We didn't have them nearly as frequently, and we basically didn't have a schedule at all for them anymore. It was pretty much wherever we could fit it in. It's easy to look back on that time and think, damn, I really wish we had had more frequent meetings. Might have kept up our motivation more and made that last push easier. But honestly, considering everything that was happening, I'm just glad that everyone stayed safe and healthy and somewhat sane. You can recover from missed deadlines. A pandemic, not so much. So, yeah, it was tough, but thankfully we did finish. We didn't get much more playtesting, which was tragic, but by the time we finished the school year in May, we had a playable version of the game, we'd shown it at the WPI Student Showcase, and won an award at that showcase, and we were ready to polish it up and release it on Steam. Releasing it on Steam had always been the end goal, but we did have a pretty important decision to make. Cost. Oh, we were going to charge suckers for this game. It was a tough decision, and we mulled it over for a while, but in the end, we settled on the low, low price of free. The main reason that we settled on this was that primarily the Call of Karen was meant to be a testament to our achievements, something to point to on our portfolios and say, look, 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 we did that, and isn't it good, and won't you hire us? Would it have been nice if it had made some money? Yeah. But also, and this is something really, really important that we had to consider, is that we had done absolutely zero advertising. Zip, zilch, nada. A cardinal indie game sin. And we knew that. We knew that well. The industry experts at the Mass Digi Game Challenge had told us as much. So we were already releasing at a huge disadvantage to our download numbers. Our concern with releasing it with any sort of dollar sign attached to it was that we thought our downloads would be absolutely kneecapped. So if we were going for pure numbers, our best bet was to release for no money. And you know what? I still stand by that. I'll get more into that later. Another important thing that you need to know, and those of you that have released a game on Steam will know this, is that you have to have your store page live for a minimum of, I believe, about 2 weeks, maybe 3, before you can actually release your game. So, about a month before we plan on releasing the Call of Karen, we make our store page live. We share it around our various social circles, I tweet about it and post about it in some Discords, and we check in daily to see what our wish lists look like. And hey, I think I hear something. I hear someone knocking on the door. Wonder who it could possibly be. Why, it's the country of Japan! Absolutely incredible. Specifically, a journalist, and then several thousand other people. So, yeah, I wake up one morning to an email from a former classmate with a link to a Japanese news article written about the Call of Karen. I think, hey, this is pretty cool. But I kind of brushed it off as, one of those bot-written articles, You know how bots will scrape the internet for content. But then I noticed something odd at that news site. 12.6K, it said at the top. That struck me as strange. What could that possibly mean? Well, I followed the link, and then my soul immediately left my body. See, I made a Twitter back in 2016 after some upper-class people told me that I ought to have one for game dev stuff, and I had about 300 followers at that point, and most of my tweets rarely broke 20 likes, and the same is true now. I saw that game developer friends who are much more popular than me also rarely broke 100 likes, so imagine my surprise when I saw that this tweet about the Call of Karen had 12.6 thousand likes. It blew my damn mind. Still does. I had no idea what to think, except that, of course, I had to frantically check the wishlist on our Steam page. And before I knew it, bang! 1,000 wishlists, the vast majority of which were from China and Japan. For context, a few months previously, in February, I had released a kind of off-the-wall free game with zero advertising on Steam. We were pretty happy to break 100 wishlists on that game before we launched. So, obviously, this was crazy. So, yeah, here's what happened. Somehow, a reporter for Denfem Nico, a pretty popular Japanese news gaming site, had picked it up. They picked up the Call of Karen, they wrote an article about it, and there we had it. Completely sheer and stupid luck, but luck that we were incredibly grateful for. It was absolutely crazy. We had no idea what to make of it. Suddenly, this game had legs. Or tentacles, if you prefer. A couple of other articles got written about the Call of Karen, mostly in Japan, and, we got a fair bit of traction before we actually got to release. Once we got to release, well, it's time for some numbers. Let's talk about numbers. In an industry rife with NDAs and spooky secrets, I am going to be as transparent with you as I possibly can, because I can, and I am hoping that this information may be useful to some people. So, numbers at release. We launched with 2,543 wish lists, and within the first week, we had 13,793 downloads. That's, how many people actually downloaded the game to their computer, and we had 26,796 licenses, which is how many people added the game to their library but didn't necessarily download it. That's why those numbers are different. As of just a couple of days ago, 10/1, we have 110,424 unique users. To my understanding, that's how many people actually launched the game. And we have, how many people played the game, and we have 169,980 licenses. So not too shabby. There's about 96 videos on YouTube covering the Call of Karen and varying popularity. I'm going to talk about that a bit in the next slide. Also, there could actually be a couple more than this. I'm using YouTube's kind of like auto scraper for videos of a certain type for this. So there's a very real chance that I missed a couple. 3.7 million plus views across the board there, but mostly from one video. Again, I'll talk about it in the next slide. And in terms of downloads by region, something that was interesting is that, very early on, when the first week or two of launch, our downloads in Asia and the United States were pretty much neck and neck. It was almost a 1-to-1 ratio. I don't think Asia ever beat out the United States, but it was really, really close. But as time continued, and and I think a lot of the people downloading from Asia realized that this game really requires a grasp of the English language to get the most out of, because a lot of it is words in English. That's a lot of the story. It changed to reflect pretty much this, which is the vast majority of our downloads, 41%ish, come from North America. And then 17.2% from Western Europe, so another big English-speaking contingent. And then 11.9% from Asia. So yeah, that's definitely down from, I want to say it was about 30 to 40% at one point. So it definitely dropped, even after we've localized to Chinese. Other countries, so like Russia and Ukraine, the Latin America, and I'm trying to remember. Oh, and Eastern Europe. Those are all about 6%. So yeah, and then miscellaneous other contingents from other places. So here's our graphs over time. This is the first month, and this is until October 1st. You will see that we had a pretty big spike at release, and then, we trended downward and stayed downward. As we're a free game, you don't see the sporadic sale spikes there, as you usually see on a long-term graph like this, because we cannot go on sale unless we actually pay you to take the game. You do see, quite that downward trend, and then, interestingly, so on August 4th, a YouTuber called Gray Still Plays with 5 million subscribers made a video on the Call of Karen, which later went on to get 3.4 million views. So you can see here there's actually, that little spike there on August 6th. So it's a bit delayed, but I would say that correlates all right. Yeah, and then a solid trend down. We also had another video from Dangerously Funny, a channel with 1.7 million subscribers, but that one wasn't nearly as popular. It doesn't even register on the graph at all. That was in November. You see there's nothing really in November there. So yeah, that's the numbers. And then if you check a look there, that's August 6th on a longer term graph. So that's what we got from that from that big YouTuber playing our game. So, we very quickly had a bunch of eyes on our game. What the hell? What were we to do? Well, the first thing was first, we were a student game, and we hadn't really expected to go anywhere. You know what that means? The only QA that we had was ourselves. So yeah, a lot of support tickets, both from Steam and emailed directly to us. Also, we had a bunch of people in other languages who wanted to play our game, which was very exciting. Especially, like I mentioned early on in the Call of Karen's life cycle, the majority of our downloads came from people outside of the U.S. I mean, Asia never outpaced the U.S., but Asia combined with Western Europe and Eastern Europe and all that definitely outpaced it in the beginning. So, when some community translators reached out to us, we thought, you know what, yeah, and we worked with them to localize the game to a bunch of different languages. Right now, the Call of Karen is in Chinese, Russian, French, Portuguese, and hopefully very soon, Polish, Japanese, and Spanish. It really brings me a lot of joy to know that people all over the world can and have been enjoying this game. And our translators are all stars for putting in the time and effort. Something else we decided to do, because hey, why not, was merch. Yeah, that's right. There's the Call of Karen merch. We got stickers, which are sold for $6.66, which really tickles me pink. We got masks, prints, shirts. We got it. Merch sales have pretty much exclusively come from friends and family. But I will say I am quite glad we did it, because it's fun to have the Call of Karen stuff. That brings me to the point of cash money. This is something that people have mentioned to me a lot. Something along the lines of, oh, I bet you really wish now that you had sold the Call of Karen for money, huh? And my answer to that is, well, no. Den Fami Nico picking us up was an absolute and utter stroke of luck that we could never have predicted. Might the Call of Karen have taken off without that? Maybe. But also, maybe not. And I also stand by the idea that our downloads would have been kneecapped by attaching a price point to the game. People here, we listed it for free and we got 100,000 downloads and think, wow, that's 100,000 customers that you could have gotten money out of. And I would argue that that's just not true. I really do think that a price would have scared off the vast, vast majority of those people. Another thing that's important to consider is reviews. Last I checked, we're sitting at mostly positive on Steam with about 78% positive reviews. You did below 70% and you get into mixed review territory, and that can really affect your download numbers. And considering that a fair chunk of the positive reviews say stuff along the lines of, this game has some bugs and it's pretty short, but I'll give it a pass because it's a free game and it's overall good, I think that attaching a price point to the Call of Karen would have really had a negative impact on our reviews. People, fairly enough, expect a pretty high standard of quality for a game that they're going to pay money for. And while I think that the Call of Karen is a high-quality product and is a real impressive feat for our team, when you put your game on an online marketplace and charge money, gamers aren't looking at your game and thinking, wow, they're a small team and they tried their best. They're thinking, I've got $5 to spend and I could just wait until Portal 1 and 2 go on sale again, so this had better be good. So I think charging money would have kind of gotten us screwed from both ends. We would have had less downloads and we would have worse reviews, and worse reviews leads to less downloads, so yeah. Honestly, in terms of harnessing our success, I do still sometimes sit and think, what could we have done to better capitalize on how suddenly this took off? And if I'm going to be honest, I don't really know the answer. We were going to be happy with 100 downloads or so, maybe a Let's Play or two from a niche content creator. This was more than we could have ever dreamed. Even now, when I go in to check the Steam statistics, more often than not, there are about 1 to 10 people playing the Call of Karen right at that moment, right at the time I checked it. And that's just so cool to me. That's kind of a segue into my next topic, which is, what do I do now? I still think that many people playing the Call of Karen at once is rad, but now I've got even more eyeballs on my work. I'm a game designer for Other Ocean Interactive, and I do live ops on a game called Project Winter, which is a social deception game that has thousands of people logging in on any given day. We do regular content updates with new features and stuff, so I've gone from making a game completely from scratch to hopping on the team of a game that has been released since 2019. It's quite a change. One of the strangest adjustments shifting from the Call of Karen to Project Winter is the team size. Being the scope bastard and working with such a small team on the Call of Karen really made me aware of how even seemingly small features can really sprawl out and affect a whole team. And I like to think that knowledge and awareness of what sort of work that comes from my decisions and design documents is something that has made me a better designer overall. It's also kind of funny because now that there are a lot of programmers implementing the documents I draft up, or at least a lot in comparison to 2, I kind of feel like a kid in a candy store sometimes because I don't have to be so cutthroat about what features I can add. My time during the Call of Karen has also made me communicate pretty closely with my producers. Now that I know the suffering of managing just a team of 4 people, I can only imagine how high the blood pressure is of someone managing a much larger team. So if I can make them less stressed, that's a win in my book. The Call of Karen also taught me another crucial lesson that is pretty important for anyone who makes any kind of entertainment media, which is you can't please everyone. That may sound like a no-brainer, but given that, we in game development are frequently hearing stories about how some 20-something made a game that was a critical and commercial darling, and now everyone's trying to imitate it, and everyone loves it, and it's the talk of the town, I think that it's sometimes a struggle to reconcile that you can put your heart and soul into a game, and a lot of people will probably not like it. In fact, if it gets popular enough, a lot of people will probably be pretty vitriolic in their criticism of it. When that happens, I think it's important to keep 2 things in mind. The first thing is something that my fellow Boston Post Mortem board member Manny brought up in a talk of his a little while ago, which is that criticism of your game is not criticism of you as a person. The other thing is to just focus on making the game fun and good for the people that you are targeting. There are plenty of people who gave the Call of Karen a thumbs down on Steam because you aren't quote-unquote enough of a Karen in the game, and we were probably never going to connect with those people, because it's not that kind of game. But there are other people who have valid, thoughtful criticisms, and there are people who give us really nice, genuine compliments. So try to filter out the noise and focus on the people that you're really trying to, or have already, won over. Before I wrap up this presentation, I just want to give some special thanks. Of course, a huge thanks again to the Call of Karen team, Tom Tawadros, Diana Kumikova, and Michael Maticoli. I simply cannot emphasize enough the time and effort and dedication that they showed for this entire project, and they are all absolutely incredible people. Also, thanks again to our lovely advisors, Dr. Gillian Smith and Professor Farley Sherry, without whom we probably would have made a ton of mistakes. Thanks to our incredibly kind community translators, to whom we are supremely grateful. And thank you for the for the countless other people who have shaped the Call of Karen along the way. The research librarian that helped us find info in the 1950s, our judges at the Mass Digi Game Challenge, our friends and family, you name it. It was a wild project and a blast from start to finish. And finally, thank you for watching. If you want to hit me up anywhere, that's my Twitter there, @DragonDirigible, and that's my email there, ktolguin@gmail.com. Thanks very much, and don't forget to let the octopus into your home. Woo!
I so wish that we had an applause track. But hey, this was awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. This is one of like the most impressive presentations I've ever seen put together.
Wow, thank you so much.
And you know, you're such a great storyteller, and you encompass so much of the heart and soul that went into this project. Thank you for giving us your time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm very glad.
Can you do like a Q&A or is
Oh, totally. Yeah, ask me any questions.
Anyone have any questions?
What was the biggest challenge in while managing the team and the project?
Oh man. I think the biggest challenge when managing the team was definitely when we transitioned to remote. Because when we were doing our regular in-person meetings, if I was having a hard time getting a hold of someone, or if like there was something really urgent, like the next day, I could be like, all right, like you haven't answered my message. What gives? Like stuff like that. I could hound people down and get a response pretty quickly, so we could have pretty fast turnarounds. But remotely, and especially when we were working remotely and we didn't have like formally scheduled meeting times, and it was just when we could fit it in. If you ask a question and someone forgets to answer, or is busy at the time, like it's really like it takes a lot longer to get an answer out of them than when you just ask them point blank, like face to face. So that was one of the things that definitely slowed down our production our production time, and was definitely a big challenge when shifting to remote work.
I'm kind of curious to hear more about you mentioned about community translation work with which obviously was very important because of the eyes that you got from Asian markets. I'm kind of curious to hear more about any insight on working with that. Like, were you very hands off and approving, or was there a lot of interesting work that you ended up doing with these community translators? Because I know cultural differences and boundaries and stuff can provide some really interesting aspects to that sort of thing.
That's such a great question. That was actually, it really varied from translator to translator. We were generally fairly hands-off because these translators were like, they were doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, to get their name on the game and everything. So it was generally like we worked with whatever they were able to give us. So with some people, it was as easy as like we sent them the sheet with the script. We were like, go, and then we like double checked them through through Google Translate or something just to make sure that they weren't slipping anything sneaky in there. But with other translators, actually, our guy Simon from Poland, that guy was really into like he wanted to make sure that everything was done right. He was a super great guy. And so he was like frequently asking me questions about like different like cultural like like one of the big things was PTA. There's a line in there about how Karen is like is talking about how her neighbor's bragging at a PTA meeting, and Simon's like, "What's a PTA?" And we had to figure out how to translate that because I guess there wasn't like an immediate equivalent in Poland or in Polish. So yeah, that was a really interesting thing that we had to discuss. But a fair amount of them we just kind of let off to the races, and it worked out pretty well.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Kate. I have a question, but I did want to say, so I've been like one of the committee members for this, I think the 17th year, been doing this. So I've seen a lot of postmortem presentations of all kinds. This is one of the best ones.
Oh, Les, that's so sweet.
You did a really awesome job. This is like really tuned, because you really tune this to the audience. Like every slide is like really set up exactly for this kind of thing. Works in terms of like the tone of your game and everything. It's like entertaining, well presented, all that stuff. So really awesome job on this.
Wow, thank you so much.
Wholeheartedly second that.
I agree with that too.
Oh, thanks. Thanks,
really,
y'all.
really great. Awesome job.
Y'all are so sweet. Thank you.
Heard that.
Thank you.
So my question, were you all using student tools when you're developing this? Because my understanding is that you can't ship a game for money when it's been developed with free tools, with student tools. They all have to be like licensed from like Autodesk and everybody else. And in fact, a game can be pulled off of Steam. Like this has happened actually, where games are pulled off of Steam because there's content in them which ends up being watermarked because, Autodesk has evil ways of doing that, and other places, and they're not. I mean, they need to make money too, I guess, and rip us all off to a certain extent. But so like what sort of tools were you using, and if they were student tools, had anybody mentioned this issue?
Yeah, so we were generally using student tools. The big one that you were talking that you mentioned that was Autodesk. We modeled most of our stuff in Maya and Max, and you're totally right about that. We were aware of this. This also factored into our decision, although I will say it factored a little bit less than you would think. While of course we were not in the we did not want to get sued. We also we're basically, because we're students and we're like, whatever. We were basically of the mindset that if they did sue us or like take it down, like that meant that someone paid attention. But yeah, that did
totally understandable. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, and didn't want to get sued, and I'm not going to recommend that you do this. Wink. But yeah, it was basically like. If the idea, if we were to release it for money, which obviously we didn't end up doing, it was, all right, well, if we get big enough where Autodesk is like, get this out of here, then that means that Autodesk somehow found out that we existed, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. Well, it is actually one of those things where when people ship a game and it gets hacked, or there's like people, say if it's like an online game, where people are actually running bots and basically causing a lot of problems. and like setting up automated cheats, all kinds of stuff. Like that means people actually care about the game.
Exactly.
So it's not always necessarily a bad thing. So that would have been good. But I think you made absolutely the right choice because I don't know, maybe it would have gone big, but would it have gone that big that like you'd all of a sudden start a big corporate, like a total indie game company that was well funded? Chances are that wouldn't necessarily happen, and there definitely was that risk that not a quarter as many people would have downloaded it and played it and stuff. So I think it was absolutely the right decision not to.
Isn't usually the answer to get the license after the fact, though? Like, say you didn't have the license, then you released it, and then they came at you, then you'd say, okay, let me buy the enterprise license of Unity or whatever. Or isn't that usually how it goes?
I don't know. The anecdotes that I've heard from people that have been affected by this, developers and stuff, or that knew other people that had, was they had to take it off Steam. So I'm not sure what the different fixes for that are, and hopefully they're that lenient that you'd have to buy. But I mean, that software isn't cheap either, so it really depends on how much. If you made a lot of money like that, that would be an issue.
Yeah, I think it usually would apply only if you were giving them a percentage or something, like, you know what I mean? If it's just a license to use the software or the tools, usually that's a one-time fee that you know.
Autodesk is brutal though.
Yeah.
It's like
Autodesk
it's so expensive. Oh man.
But they don't tarnish, like they don't.
I have no idea.
They don't want a piece of 200,000 sales, do they?
I don't think so. I have no idea.
Or whatever, 100,000 sales that you did. If you,
I don't think so. It's not a contractual. Like, for instance, if you make a game that sells a lot of copies with Unreal, which is a free engine to use and stuff, you are obligated by your user contract to actually give them a cut. For Autodesk, they basically sell their software, or probably more likely nowadays, like rent their software out, which also sucks for many reasons in and of itself. But they would probably want at least for you to pay for the software at minimum.
On that point, actually, I do believe that there has been hubbub about Autodesk shifting from their paid structure to a new renting structure, actually. Which I don't know enough to go off about it here, and also it's not exactly the place for me to go off about it here, but I figured I'd mention.
Yeah, that's good to know, because I wasn't sure exactly what they were doing lately and stuff. So yeah.
I actually I saw something recently about Autodesk's new model, and it looks like they have a new system. Yeah, it's called Autodesk Flex, I think, where you can buy X amount of tokens, and then give those tokens to computers to grant them a license for a certain amount of time. Though with that system, especially with the way the pricing is structured, I think it's more so geared towards organizations rather than small teams. Because I think it's like $500 for 2,000 tokens, which is 6 months of use time or something like that.
Dang. Any other questions about the Call of Karen? Or Autodesk, I guess.
I actually have a question. I was going to ask, as a student, did you guys pick Unreal out of being familiar with it, or was there a legitimate advantage over picking something like Unity?
I'm laughing because one of our programmers, Michael, is in the call. And who can confirm that no, we did not pick it because we were familiar with it. None of us had ever used Unreal. Not only had none of us used Unreal, But also our programmers hated it, which I feel I didn't want to include I didn't want to include a slide on this because it wasn't really like my part of like the story to tell, but like shout out to them. They really suffered. Like they loathed Unreal. And I appreciate them so much for soldiering on. The idea was basically that we wanted we actually had, this was another discussion we had, although it was less of a big discussion than the VR versus PC one. One of the things was actually I think it was arguably the biggest thing was that we really wanted to make a pretty game, and not that you can't do that in Unity. You totally can do that in Unity. But we thought it, and we're sort of right, maybe. I don't know. It really depends on what you're doing. But that it would be faster to make a pretty game in Unreal. The other thing was also, like we mentioned, this was the idea was for this to be like a point to and a point to and be look we did this and isn't it great, and none of us had ever used Unreal before, and I think all of us had used Unity in some capacity, so it was like another area of our skill that we had to round out. That being said, I I do know that Unreal was not was a contentious choice among our programmers, so I thank them very much for putting up with it.
Sounds like a tough choice.
Oh man, making a game with a game engine you're totally unfamiliar with. Yeah,
Yeah.
that does sound like a nightmare. Man,
any Godot users in here?
Michael, I see I see you unmuting yourself. Do you want to add anything since you're here?
I hit the button one too many times by accident, but yeah, are we still recording?
Yeah, we're still recording.
Okay. It's no, I just wanted to throw in, we actually ended up doing a disproportionate amount of the game in Blueprint.
I was wondering about that.
There was very little C++ code that went into the game.
In the final build?
So that's really frustrating.
In the final builds.
Spaghetti.
Kate alludes to this in their presentation where Deanna and I are both listed as spaghetti wranglers.
I see.
We're blasting through the past. Man, this presentation was so long. There we go. Yeah, spaghetti wranglers.
Nice.
That makes more sense now. That's context.
Nice.
Literal spaghetti.
Literal. Yep.
Suffice it to say, it was definitely a learning experience.
And I thank you.
So none
and
of you
salute
had actually
every day.
used. So none of you had actually used Blueprint before.
No, I believe that for most of us, it was pretty much our first time picking up Unreal for any project.
I had made exactly one game in Unreal for a 24-hour game jam, and it was like the worst thing that could have ever existed. So I was like, but I did it. But the thing was, I had made that game, and obviously trying to learn Unreal in 24 hours is like such a mistake. But I had made that game, and even though it was terrible, and like I hadn't even like properly built the lighting, it looked like it was a 3D game that looked better than almost anything I'd done in Unity with like putting in a ton of time and effort into lighting. Which I also might just show that I'm just not as much of a guru with Unity's lighting, and that I still got to work on that. But yeah, that was part of the reason that I was giving them the hard sell on that. Any other questions?
Is there any future for was it Trumbus?
Oh, Trumbus
game?
Yeah.
Is there any future game to springboard off of the Call of Karen to something new now that you have a successful title, even though it's free?
Well, we're trying to get our act together for like finishing up that last bit of localization that we've got. We've got all the translations. We just gotta. get the build, which Unreal, you know how it is. And so how to do that. Past that, we don't have anything planned right now. We do all like, we're all at different stages in, what we're up to, and we're also now all scattered across the country instead of being in the same school zone. So I would be happy to get the team back together at some point, but potentially not for as big of a project. Since again, we've all got our own stuff, like I work full time, like Michael's in grad school. I don't know what Tom's up to actually. He's a mystery, and Deanna works full time. So yeah. But I would love to get the gang back together at some point for something, even if it's just for drinks. Any other questions?
Well, it's just interesting that now that you have a game out and you've been there, done that, to know like what you would do different this time. Like what would you do different on the next title, even if it was a called Karen 2 or whatever, anything or something completely new.
Oh man, I'm trying to think. I would definitely I would definitely advertise. If we were going to release it for money, at least, that is, I would definitely because that was the big thing, right? And we knew that. In fact, we went into the game challenge and we were and we said at the game challenge, we're going to advertise it in this way, which everyone I think at the game challenge knows you're kind of selling them a bit of a beautiful lie. But at least when marketing is concerned. I don't know. Some people did carry through. Fun fact, the winner of the game challenge that year was actually Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, which did follow through entirely pretty much. But marketing, definitely. It was something that we knew we should do, and then we just totally didn't. Because we were so busy getting everything else together. There's a myriad number of management things I would have done differently. I don't know. We didn't. This was a really cursed thing. We didn't have any sort of task tracking system. We totally could have used Monday or Trello or honestly we could have used a free trial of Jira or something. But we didn't. We tracked all of our tasks on a Google Doc. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? So I definitely wouldn't have done that. There was one point where I don't know, we there's there were so many stages that had little things that looking back I'm I wish we had done this, or I wish we'd have done that, but overall it ended up working out.
What about size of the game? Would you go bigger or smaller?
In terms of what I like in games, I would love to go bigger, but in terms of actually what we were able to accomplish, it really would depend on the kind of game. If we were to do a narrative style game again, I think this was actually a nice length. It meant that we could so the whole game, depending on how long you go through it, it can be completed in as little as 14 minutes if you were a speedrunner, which people have actually sped run the Call of Karen, which is really nice. Crazy. It can be completed as little as 14 minutes if you're a speedrunner. And it can, and usually though it takes people about, I want to say 45 minutes to an hour-ish if you're taking your time. And that was actually a decent length because that was something you could buzz through it if you wanted to test something. It meant that we could get a lot of our stuff kind of fine-tuned. It's been a while since I've gone through and played through the whole thing. But the last I checked, I still felt pretty proud about I felt like we had a nice kind of tight script that didn't have there wasn't really any filler in there. The jokes are, in my opinion, funny. But I felt like that was enough time to make a nice compact, tasty experience. But
did you guys have to cut much?
Yeah, we had to cut. Was it in terms of the script? Actually, we didn't have to cut that much, I don't think. And I think maybe at one point we had to cut a decent chunk when we did when we factored it down, or when we changed it from 2 weeks to 1. But I actually think that was probably good for us, or at least good for me, because it meant that we could get rid of anything that wasn't really landing or was kind of okay and stick with just the stuff that was good. But like yeah, we had to cut like a lot of like a lot of smaller stuff, but overall the main things that we wanted, I think we were all able to get in the game, which was nice.
I had a couple questions.
Oh, go for it.
Go ahead.
Have you thought about putting in some sort of like free-to-play model, like a freemium?
I've genuinely considered it. Like, but then I thought like I don't know, like it's and this is like I just get so annoyed at monetization. Like freemium monetization. I don't think it like there are a lot of
DLC. Do you mean like a DLC?
Oh, DLC could be interesting, but a lot of I know there are a lot of people like especially like fledgling game designers who are like free to play, like freemium's the devil, and I don't think that, but I do think that it's something that is especially hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes, because I'm the kind of person who will literally never pay for a free to play game. Like I just simply don't do it, so it's kind of hard like to wrap my like even after doing like research on it, like you know, for all manner of things, like I it's still sometimes hard to wrap my head around that area of design. You know, I hope to improve at it. Like I hope to improve in all areas of design. But yeah, and I think the Call of Karen, especially since the way that we have it set up is like, I think it since it being a story based game, unless we were to do like something like chapters or whatever, it doesn't necessarily lend itself very well to a freemium model, because it's not like it's the gameplay isn't necessarily the highlight. Like the story and like all that other stuff is the highlight of it. So it's that like requires a different level of monetization than I think the most popular kind of freemium, which is like, you know, like pay to get like some sort of advantage or pay to get some sort of skins, which we can't really do either, because what are we gonna skin? So yeah, it's something I've thought of. I thought about like when we were first starting to pick up, and then I ended up being like, like maybe someday like a DLC, but considering how busy everyone is, likelihood is low.
Make the Clash of Karen.
It was Tom came up with the Dawn of Deborah.
Nice.
Hey, the localization, are people donating their time for that, or is that getting paid for, or how's that happening?
People just straight up donated their time. I really cannot like thank these people enough.
Like players or player-based people?
Genuinely, yeah, it's players. We got like we got some people who wanted to be paid, but then we were like, we're broke, because at the time, me and Tom had just graduated and we were looking for a job, and Deanna and Michael were still in school. So we these were people who reached out to us through our email on our website, and we're just like, and some of them had like credentials, and some actually a decent amount of them had credentials, and like some of them were just like people we knew. So we have a friend of ours, Mari, who did the Japanese translation, and so we and yeah, they just did it out of the goodness of their hearts, and also of course we put them in their name in the credits and everything.
And you're just talking about text, right? Not voiceover.
Yes, we only did text. We had a lot of voiceover, and I did some voiceover work, not like my voice, but like, you know, directing people when I worked at Firehose, and that taught me how long that takes, which is why it actually really worked out that I ended up doing all of the radio work, because the radio voices, because if we ever needed a new take, I could just do it. But yeah, so I was not prepared to go through the hassle of trying to direct voiceover takes in a different language.
What did you use to manage the project? Did you have it on like a Git repo, like a GitHub?
Yeah, we had a GitHub, and then we all used like I think we all I want to say we all used, except for I think the programmers might have used the same one. We all used different clients to pull the GitHub from, which was so cursed. Like every other meeting, Tom would come in and he'd be like, "My Git Kraken's broken," and I would sink a little further into my seat because I was the one who recommended Git Kraken. But then about halfway through the project, I ended up switching to source tree. I abandoned him. I abandoned my lad. Any other questions?
I'll chime in and say the Git thing was definitely a bit of a nightmare. I remember we have, because, we all had to do work separately, especially when we went remote, so we'd have just full days where we had to sit down and manually merge changes together, because, like, it's a small game, it's all in one scene, so we had stuff, like, distributed into sub-levels in very strategic ways, and it got a little bit crazy.
Yeah, shout out to y'all. We did not make your lives easy. I appreciate you so very much.
We learned a lot. It was fun.
Did you guys make multiple kinds of builds for like Linux or whatever, or Mac, or?
I think we just went Windows because the only Mac we could have like possibly tested on was like. Or did we? Or no, that was a different thing. We did multiple builds. No, we didn't do multiple. Sorry, we didn't do multiple builds because I think we only had Windows machines at our disposal. So we didn't want to release something that we didn't have anything else to test on.
We did Windows support only for the final release. I think some of our testing builds did have Mac versions because we had to for some of the like WPI playtesting things. Right. Although we did in-person playtesting for the most part, so that there might have been like one or two Mac builds somewhere along the line.
Thank you. Yeah.
Have you thought about bringing this to Android?
Oh man.
Or iOS?
Genuinely, I haven't, just because I don't know how well. I mean, I imagine it has to some degree, but I don't know how well Unreal plays nice with mobile. Especially considering that, it's a 3D game. It would take up a lot of space, and we'd have to deal with like different, it was hard enough for us to like get everything working on Windows. Like trying to deal with all of the like the vast amount of differences in like people's phones and like operating systems and stuff like that would potentially be a lot. and also our we'd probably have to go through and like crunch down a lot of the assets so it wouldn't be quite as large. And again, so much of it is audio based, and my understanding, and my understanding could be wrong about this, my understanding of a lot of mobile games is that most people play without the audio. So considering how like that it is best enjoyed with audio by like I would say a pretty big factor. No, it's not something I've looked into at all.
Trying to make sure that it would work on all the different types of phones, especially on Android, would have been a nightmare.
God.
I don't think you would have wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Well, was this a semester-long project, or was it like the full academic year? Or?
So we started it. So we started it 6 months before we, were even getting any kind of grade for it. We started it. So my senior year, which was when we were doing it, was 2019, 2020. We started like fall of 2019 to spring of 2020. We started it in January of 2019. That was when we started getting together and meeting and talking about stuff. But we didn't really kick off into full production until that fall of 2019. And then we released in July of 2020. And so it took about, it was about like a year and a half for like the whole thing. But, we're still like very, very low key working on it, but mostly just to get that last translation stuff in.
Yep, that's cool.
Do you remember any play testing feedback that you got that you dramatically changed something in the game, like that you were like, oh no, people aren't getting this, or
Yeah, actually, there's a big thing, which I didn't include because I couldn't think of a neat way to fit it into the presentation. But one of the big things was, even though we took place in the 1950s, one of the original things from the Call of Karen was that you was making a smoothie. That was like the idea, was one of our big original ideas was you make a smoothie and your ingredients are running away from you and like stuff like that. And we found out, like, we were like, oh man, now that we're doing 1950s, we're going to have to get rid of smoothie. And then we found out blenders existed in the 1950s. So we were like, great, we'll keep smoothie. And then we totally ended up scrapping / reworking smoothie, for a bunch of reasons. So one of the reasons being that, the smoothie was, the container, like the blender was clear, so you could see what ingredients you'd already put in. But that also meant that casting shadows and depth perception was super weird, which wasn't something I had expected at all. It was really difficult, though, when you were picking up an item and it was kind of floating in front of you, to drop it accurately into the blender, even though the blender was decently big. So that was, and we were like, oh, well, we can fix that in some way. But then we got some really good feedback, which was, well, even if you can fix it, like, it doesn't really feel like the 1950s. Like, even though smoothies did exist and, like, blenders did exist in the 1950s, like, when you play that, you don't think, I'm in the 1950s right now. And so we actually had a whole meeting to discuss what we wanted to keep the bones of that task. We definitely wanted Karen to cook / make something, other than the meatloaf at night. We definitely wanted her to do that. Because that was a big part of 1950s housewife life. But it wasn't going to be smoothie. We actually kicked around for a little bit, having her make an aspic instead, which, for those of you that don't know, aspics are those horrible Jell-O salads that they made in the 1950s. Like, they made gelatin and they put, like, hard-boiled eggs and tuna and mayonnaise in it. It was awful, and it was a huge thing in the 1950s. We actually referenced it in one of the books that's in the game. It's called, like, 1001 Things to Do with Gelatin. So we, instead of going with that, we ended up with breakfast, which solved all of our problems, because, breakfast, like, that's a common thing. That felt sufficiently like the 1950s, and we could have them put it into this nice shiny metallic pan, which both had a bigger surface area for them to drop stuff on and was easier to tell, like, when you were, like, hovering over it. So that was a big thing. We changed that. That was huge.
We can probably take one more question. Going once, going twice.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So, since first off, you said that you are working at Michael's and going to grad school right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, with the success of your game, The Call of Karen, are you going to be making any more games in your free time, just like The Call of Karen? Oh, yeah, that's what I meant.
That's a good question. Yeah, I've been working at Other Ocean Interactive for about, oh god, how many months? I want to say 8-ish, about 8 months, maybe 7. And I've been having a great time. I really have been enjoying it. But I have been kicking around doing my own personal stuff in the on the side. Luckily, my contract is such that I'd be able to do that. Which is not necessarily true of all game dev people, so grateful for that. I've actually, lately though, I've been exploring, like, non-game dev creative stuff, so I've been making a lot of music, which I didn't get to do a lot during school, because it was kind of, as you can see on this slide, I am a jack of all trades, and I was frequently told that I had to focus on a thing. So music kind of fell to the wayside. So I'm very much, one of the greatest things about being employed, in my opinion, is that and that is very different from being a student is that you have that really, like, even when you have, like, you know, like, which I think I haven't experienced yet, when you have, like, a crunch at work and you're working extra hours, there's still a regimented time kind of between when you're working and when you're not working, whereas when you're a student, you are always a student. There is no letting up. Like, it's really rough. So having that regimented time has really left me with, thankfully, a decent amount of energy to pursue other creative things. So I definitely plan on, providing my contract continues to allow it, being able to work on, little projects and stuff in my free time. I don't know about the rest of the team. I think, they're still figuring their stuff out, and I don't want to speak for them. But yeah, it's a good time.
That really rings true, Kate, with, the role of being a student being all of who you are. I definitely felt that way in art school.
God, yeah, like, that's one of the things that I, not to get on my soapbox again, but, like, I understand to some degree why people give, like, students a bad rap. Like, I do get it. Like, there's some students that I'm like, even when I was a student, I'm like, come on, man. Like, but really, like my amount of free time and creative energy and just overall, honestly, mood to a large degree has gone up significantly since I've been able to have a regimented time between work and not working, and also getting paid for working instead of
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's such a game changer.
Didn't you do the music for Call of Karen?
Oh, that's a good question. I wrote exactly one song for the Call of Karen. Everything else was stock music. I initially was like, oh, I can write all the songs for it, and then I realized how much else was happening, and I was like, never mind, that's too much. So it's all Creative Commons 0/Creative Commons Attribution music, except for one song that plays at the end or on the credit screen, which I did write, which is called "Don't Let the Octopus Into Your Home," which is why the presentation is called this. And that one was good. I'm glad I got to do that tune.
Is that song somewhere other than the game? Is it on a SoundCloud or something?
It's on SoundCloud. And
is it?
It is on SoundCloud.
I gotta hear it.
And someone someone ripped it and put it onto YouTube, which I thought was really funny. Thank you, person who did that.
What they do to it?
No, they just like put it on. They're like, I think the description of the video was like, this song. I didn't see this song on YouTube, and I think it should be on YouTube. And I'm like, cool, thanks. I agree.
I thought you meant like they auto-tuned it or something. They did something.
That'd be crazy. Probably could use some auto-tune, to be honest. Also, before we wrap up, I do want to share one short Call of Karen story, which brought me so much joy. Was that, like I mentioned, we have a speedrun board. Like, people have actually sped run the Call of Karen, which is really funny. But even more funny is that there was a special category of speedrun called Oven Percent, which is where when you first load into the game, you have to shove, you can open the oven, you have to shove every single interactable object that you can into the oven as fast as you can, and that's the speed run. And there's 4 or 5 entries, I want to say. It's really funny. The record is 3 minutes and 48 seconds or something like that. It brings me so much joy. Oven Percent. It's all I could have ever wanted.
Awesome.
That's such a magical experience when people just look for challenges in the game that you wouldn't have otherwise presented.
God, yeah, honestly, one of my favorite things about video game.
Oh, so where's this board?
Oh, the speedrun board? It's hiding somewhere. Unless it somehow got taken down, which would be illegal.
Oh, but what I meant to say is is it on Discord or on
it's on speedrun.com.
Oh, speedrun.com. Oh, okay.
Yeah, here, hold on.
That's
thanks,
amazing.
Michael. Yeah, Oven Percent. 3 minutes 45 seconds. That was close. Man.
Well, hey, make sure to put the information of how people can reach you in the general channel and in the announced channel.
Oh, yes, thank you. I will do that. And thanks again so much for letting me present. I'm very happy to do it.